In the 15th century, the city of Navadvipa was the undisputed heavyweight capital of the academic world. If you wanted to prove your worth in logic, grammar, or philosophy, this was the arena where power was dictated. But a sudden, paralyzing fear had swept through the city's most revered scholars. These were men who had spent their entire lives mastering complex texts, yet they were suddenly completely terrified to debate. The source of that dread was a man named Keshav Kashmiri. He had just arrived in the city carrying the title of Nimai Pandit, meaning he was an undefeated champion who had systematically crushed opposing scholars all across India. Keshav was actively hunting for the next victory to feed his massive ego. If the elders of Navadvipa refused to debate him, or worse, if they lost, centuries of the city's glorious academic reputation would be completely destroyed. Keshav possessed an absolute advantage. He held a direct boon from the goddess of knowledge herself, a divine guarantee that he could never lose an argument. When the oldest and wisest minds stepped back, the only person willing to face this unstoppable force was Nimai Pandit, a 16-year-old boy. When Keshav looked at his opponent, he actually laughed out loud. He openly mocked the teenager, asking if Navadvipa really thought a child of yesterday could challenge the greatest scholar alive. Which brings us to a central mystery. How could a teenager logically deconstruct an opponent who was backed by divine intervention? The two met at the banks of the Ganges River. Nimai opened with a brilliant trap. Instead of going on the offensive, he acted entirely submissive, calling himself an ignorant child in the presence of a master. He politely asked Keshav to compose a few verses praising the holy river, framing the request as a favor to help the young students learn. This diagram represents Keshav's mental output in that moment. He eagerly took the bait. To show off his absolute supremacy, he stood by the water and instantly composed 100 incredibly complex Sanskrit verses at the speed of a raging storm. This terrifying pace was deliberate. It was an intellectual weapon designed to overwhelm the listener, making it impossible to process the grammar or meaning of the words as they flew by. Keshav had essentially deployed an intellectual nuke. He looked down at Nimai, fully expecting the teenager to be crushed under the sheer weight of his genius. But Nimai just smiled. In real time, he had perfectly and instantly memorized every single syllable of all 100 verses. Ignoring 99 flawless sections, Nimai surgically isolated a single point of failure, the 64th verse. Clarifying Bhavani Dhatu, he pointed out a samas dosha, a grammatical flaw, and an alankar dosha, a rhetorical error. Two simultaneous errors caught in a split second. The previously undefeated world champion froze completely. Confronted with hard linguistic proof by a mere teenager, he found himself utterly incapable of formulating a response. The loudest, most aggressive intellect in all of India had been cleanly dismantled by a young boy's quiet, flawless attention to detail. That night, Keshav sat completely alone in his room. The title of undefeated champion meant nothing now, and the massive ego he had built his entire identity around was in pieces. Desperate and weeping, he began to meditate. He reached out to his patron goddess, begging to know why she had allowed her champion to be humiliated by a child. In a dream, goddess Saraswati delivered a profound revelation. She explained that she had not abandoned him. Rather, the boy he had mocked was Lord Narayan, the master of the universe. She presented him with a simple, humbling paradox. How could the deity of knowledge possibly oppose the source of all truth? Keshav finally realized that losing the debate was not a failure of his intelligence. It was a surgical, deeply necessary intervention to cure his spiritual blindness. The next morning, the dynamic between the two completely inverted. The man who had conquered the greatest minds in India dropped to his knees before a 16-year-old boy. Keshav offered a complete surrender. He formally gave up his victories and his impressive titles, begging Nimai to accept him not as an opponent, but as a disciple. Through this collapse, Keshav internalized the ultimate truth of his lifelong studies. The actual purpose of education is not to build a mountain of ego, but to teach you how to bow. Because without profound humility and devotion, supreme intelligence is nothing